The original Tecmo Bowl on the NES is a forgotten classic. If anybody thinks about this game at all, it's usually because of how overpowered players like Bo Jackson are. Now, since Bo is faster than everybody else, he's become kind of a meme over the years. Most people ban the use of him in multiplayer games since he's basically an automatic touchdown. But the game itself, beyond just him, is pretty remarkable, even though it's dated. And it deserves a lot more attention than it's received. Well, welcome to the special nighttime edition of Action Football Sundays. And as you can see, I'm dressed up in a pretty warm jacket because we have a little problem with heating in the house. It's kind of broken. Anyways, you probably guessed Thanksgiving kind of caught up with me. I hope that you guys have all had a good holiday season, at least so far. Now, just so you know, I've got a lot of great ideas for videos for Christmas and New Year's, and I'm going to power my way through the slow months of January and February. Make sure that you check out the Patreon link in the description. Sign up for free. You'll get notified of all of my new videos the day that they come out, and I'm going to start making some Patreon content as soon as well, so look forward to that coming up. Now, as you probably remember, the original Tecmo Bowl was an arcade game that looked like this. You could see maybe 20 yards at a time. It was a 10-on-10 game, and it was slow and really limited. Okay, yeah, I know that when I made that first video about the arcade game, I said it was an 11-on-11 game, and somebody in the comments ripped me apart for saying that. Yeah, I mean, I get stuff wrong from time to time. It happens. But anyway, it's still close enough to sort of give you that real football feel, if you know what I mean. Anyway, the problem with the arcade game is that you can't call any plays. In that sense, it was kind of like 10-yard fight. Both of these games only allowed you to snap the ball and react to what was happening. In Tecmo Bowl, you could choose a player to receive your pass before snapping the ball, but you couldn't change him. And the game was so slow. I mean, it's just killer slow. Anyway, apparently Tecmo at some point in time got the message about the speed of the game. And the thing is that by the time that the NES game came out, Tecmo knew that speed was the key to making a really good game. So this is a game called Bomb Jack. This is a popular arcade game that was released in 1984. Of course, that was right in the middle of the famous video game crash. Anyway, as you can see here, this was created by a company called Techmo Limited. So the thing is that the Japanese company Techmo turned into Techmo right around the end of 1986. It's just in time for the Tecmo Bowl arcade game to be released. But there was another key arcade game that Techmo had released right before Tecmo Bowl, one that actually played a lot better and was a lot faster. So this game is called Techmo World Cup. This is a soccer game that was actually really popular at the time. If you play it, you'll notice that it's really fast, and that's probably the big key to its popularity. Now look again at the Tecmo Bowl arcade game and you'll see the difference right away. Techmo World Cup is exciting and challenging largely because it's fast. And it was so popular that it directly inspired the Sensible World of Soccer series. In fact, there are still people to this day who say that Sensible World of Soccer is the greatest series of all time. I know because they've told me. Now, of course, if you guys are like me, you're American, you probably didn't know anything about this game. It was really popular in Europe and Japan. Now, I don't know for a fact that the success of games like Tekken World Cup actually influenced the direction of Tecmo Bowl, though I'm pretty sure that Tecmo figured out eventually that when it sped the games up, there were a lot more people who wanted to play them. Anyway, the thing is that there were other Tecmo games that came out also before the first Tecmo Bowl and NES that were successful mostly because of how quickly they played. The arcade version of Rygar, for example, uses a lot of the same sounds as Tecmo Bowl. And as you can see here, it's a pretty fast-flowing game. In retrospect though, it was probably the 1989 release of the NES version of Ninja Gaiden that convinced Tecmo's developers that speed really was the key to success. Now the arcade original isn't a bad game, though it seems like a generic fighting game. The NES version, on the other hand, is fast and furious, and it's one of the more challenging games for the system. It's also one of the best platformers on the system, or anywhere period. It's largely because of that holy combination of speed, play control, and challenge. Anyway, I tend to believe that some of that rubbed off on Tecmo Bowl. In fact, after playing both Tecmo Bowl and Tecmo Super Bowl consecutively, I honestly think the original Tecmo Bowl is actually a little bit faster. Well, the time goes by faster, that's for sure. You're only given a minute and a half per quarter in this game. But that's plenty of time because the clock does some really strange things. For example, I've had running plays that only take up a single second. But the thing is that speed and time, those are not the only strengths that this game has. Actually, when you really look at it, everything in Tecmo Bowl on the NES is an improvement over the arcade version, with the exception of the graphics. Part of the reason why the arcade game is so slow is because you have all those animations that they just had to fit in. Get rid of those because it's an NES game and suddenly the game plays really well. It feels, in fact, like a completely different game. So one example of this is that you can actually choose your teams in Tecmo Bowl. The arcade version lets you choose one of 4 players, Larry, Bob, Eric, or John. There are really only 2 teams and you can't really choose anything. In the NES version, you can choose from 12 different cities that loosely represent NFL teams from 1987. The real players are there, though the cities and the logos are fake. There was no NFL license. But the truth is, you're probably not going to notice that since the team colors are right and the players honestly are all you really care about. Now, the thing is that if you've played that arcade game, the Tecmo Bowl arcade game, then you know that there's a ton of similarities. Fortunately, though, most people actually haven't played that game, and it's because it kind of sucks. But there's a whole ton of similarities between these games. For example, like the field is just about the same length. The NES version also only shows you maybe 15 yards at a time at most. The player sprites are also relatively large. And as you can see, there are only 9 players to a side, which was probably designed to reduce the sprite flickering problem that the NES is famous for. In contrast, Tecmo Super Bowl shows you about 25 yards of the screen at a time. The sprites are smaller, and it's actually pretty common to run into the flickering problem. And there are actually 11 guys per side. I counted twice this time to make sure. Okay, the best innovation, if you want to call it that, on the NES version of Tecmo Bowl is that you can, call plays. What a concept. Anyway, the system that Tecmo Bowl uses on the NES really is brilliant. Now, there are not a whole ton of plays to choose from. You've only got 4 plays. But the way that they put it together is satisfying, and it really is a lot of fun. This screen shows up between plays. Each team has 4 set plays. Most teams have 2 passing plays and 2 running plays. Some teams are a little bit imbalanced. And so, for example, you know that Dan Marino is almost certainly going to pass. Now the nice thing about this system is that this allows you to select plays and try to outguess your opponent. However, the game also doesn't bog you down with way too many options. This is something that's a problem when you start getting into the Madden games where you've got like 100 something different play calls, and you can flip the play and do all sorts of stuff. It can get a little bit overwhelming. So if you look at other football games though that were released around the time that Tecmo Bowl was released, you'll see what I mean. Games like 10-Yard Fight don't have any plays to call at all. You just get the ball and you make something up on the fly. The defense will line up in different formations, and there are tricks to beating each of the formations that you'll face. But the game is really slow and really awkward, as you can see. Now, I'll tell you guys this, if 10-Yard Fight were faster, if it had better play control, and if you could call like 1 or 2 plays, I'd actually be pretty positive about it. Now, the NES version is a little bit faster than the arcade version, but it still just drives me nuts. I mean, you play it for like 10 minutes and then you're just like, I can't do this anymore. You really would have been better off just not buying it when it came out in 1985. Just wait for Tecmo Bowl in 1989. So as I mentioned before, you can't call any plays in that Tecmo Bowl arcade game. Now, you could call plays in the John Elway arcade game. That's another 9-on-9 game. And that game gave you a much longer screen to look at, which actually is a pretty nice touch. But it has a lot of other issues. So people have told me that arcade emulators, MAME and stuff like that really have a hard time doing accurate emulation of the arcade controls for the John Elway football game. That's probably why I have such a hard time figuring it out. Anyway, sometime in the future I will do a review of this game once I kind of figure out how to play it. Yeah, and then you've got games like LJN's NFL game, which is the game that had the official NFL license. Now, to play that game, you had to hold on to a separate poster that came with the game. That's where all the plays are listed. Actually, once you know a few plays by heart, you'll figure out that you can choose to run or pass regardless of the play call, and then the game becomes more fun. Again, this game is extremely slow and is one of the worst football games ever made. And the thing is that LJN game came out over 6 months after Tecmo Bowl came out on the NES. I mean, there was more than enough time for them to, play that game, see what was going well, and try to craft a game based around the good points of Tecmo Bowl. There's no excuse. I've already talked about NES Play Action Football. This one has a lot more plays to choose from, sure. The isometric perspective is special. Some people in the comments have said that they like it and they're pretty special. But to be honest with you, the game is just way too slow.
Ready, set.
Tecmo Bowl is faster and has much more of an arcade feel to it. I mean, seriously, after playing Tecmo Bowl, you'll wonder why in the world you would even bother with Play Action Football. Yeah, like I said before, Play Action Football is bad. It's just a bad game. I know some of you guys like it. I just can't stand it. I can't even sit through a full game. But, the fact that Tecmo Bowl is a better game than Play Action Football, which I think is clearly the case, doesn't mean that Tecmo Bowl is a perfect game. In fact, there's some things that are missing that are a little bit crazy. So, for example, there are no onside kicks at all, no matter how low the bar gets. Punting looks really awkward. The player kicking the ball kind of jumps into it for some strange reason. But, I mean, at least you can punt. I'm not sure that the arcade version even has that as an option. So the other issue with Tecmo Bowl on the NES is that you can do some of the real cheap stuff that you can do in the arcade game. Let me show you. It took me a little while to figure it out, but you can do tricks to get an interception. On defense, you always want to choose a defensive back and look to see which player is highlighted from the other team. Now, if you time it right, you can get in front of that player right when the ball gets there and intercept the pass. This is very similar to the arcade version where you can intercept any pass as long as you time the jump right. Now it's also really easy to break tackles in the NES Tecmo Bowl. It's harder in Tecmo Super Bowl, which is at least a little bit more, I guess, realistic. In Tecmo Bowl, though, a good runner like Bo Jackson can simply knock defenders all over the screen. And in the arcade version, where there are no player names, even your quarterback can simply knock every defender off of him and get miracle runs. Now, the thing is, nobody plays these games because they are accurate. They're fun. That's the whole point. But if you really want to mod the game, if you want to make it more accurate, you want to get in and change some stuff, and you want to make it harder, you will have a much easier time doing all of that to Tecmo Super Bowl. The first NES Tecmo Bowl game is fun, but it really is an arcade game at heart, not really a sim. So the original Tecmo Bowl on the NES also has a great halftime show. Now, the arcade version has a halftime show that's really lame. I mean, I was seriously disappointed with this. But that first NES game does not disappoint. Tecmo Super Bowl still has a better halftime show, of course. But the original one really is a lot of fun. Anyway, maybe looking at the cheerleaders is important to you like it is to me. Maybe it's not. It doesn't really matter. I do think, though, that stuff like this really helps with the feel of the game. When I play like the LJN game, NES Play Action Football games like that, I really miss the fact that, there's like no cheerleaders in it. I mean, if you want to make a game that's both fun and attractive, you might as well go all the way with that. Anyway, even though the game is limited, Tecmo Bowl really is a lot of fun. The game is fast and furious, and it's really hard to put down. The only thing that hurts it is that Tecmo Super Bowl is undeniably better. But the first game really is an underrated masterpiece that people have forgotten about these days. Now, the real interesting thing about this is that this kind of was the game that started the golden age of Tecmo games. So like I said, Ninja Gaiden kind of showed Tecmo what was possible with good speed, good play control, and good challenge. So in late 1989, Tecmo released Gekito Stadium, a Japanese baseball game that really is one of the best baseball games on the Famicom. Now, we know it in the United States as Bad News Baseball, and it's an absolutely fantastic game. For example, you can tell it's a Tecmo game because of these great cutscenes. So there's also Tecmo Baseball, which is a US only release. Now that game's fun, but it's nothing like Bad News Baseball. I really think that Bad News Baseball is one of the real underrated games on the NES. It's not exactly like the Tecmo Super Bowl of baseball games, but it still is really hard to put down. Eventually, of course, Tecmo made a Tecmo NBA Basketball on the NES. That's one of the most ambitious NES basketball games ever created. The Super Nintendo and Genesis versions are a lot better, of course. In fact, I would say that this series set the standard for 5-on-5 console basketball games up until EA's NBA Live series. And of course, Tecmo came out with that famous Tecmo Super Bowl on the NES in 1991. Versions of Tecmo Super Bowl came out on the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis in 1993. As much fun as those games are, though, it's really the NES version that's the gold standard, even after so many years, I mean like 35 years. Anyway, as you guys already know, there are a ton of really cool versions of Tecmo Super Bowl out there. There's all sorts of great stuff that the modding community has done over the years. But having said all that, really don't overlook the original. The original game is still a great game. I mean, there are a couple of things missing, like you can't call a timeout, but you don't need to because the clock does whatever it does, right? But the game is still a great classic. It's a lot of fun, and I promise you, if you sit down and play it, you're not going to want to put it down.